Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. Obviously, there are a lot of new units, mechanics, and civilizations to cover these days, but something important's cropped up, so put everything else on hold for a moment. We have to talk about farms. The latest AoE2 patch had 3 surprising changes related to farming, and in this video, that's what we're going to dig into. I won't bury the lead. The big one is a change to farming upgrades, which are now going to give at least some benefit to existing farms. This isn't really happening out of nowhere. Farm upgrades have always had a unique hurdle in that they took a long time to have an appreciable impact. Just to frame the issue, consider Double Bit Axe, which competes for priority with Horse Collar in early feudal age. It takes 25 seconds to research, but then immediately improves your lumberjack gather rate by 20%. So with even a handful of villagers on wood, we start talking about a roughly 4-minute payback time being realistic. Contrast that with Horse Collar, where even if you get it just before you place your first farm and everything's perfect, you didn't really have anything different happen because of Horse Collar until almost 9 minutes later when the farm comes up for reseeding, delaying that farm reseed by roughly 4 minutes. Even then, once you reseed it, with or without the farm upgrade, you've spent the same amount of wood at that point. So even 15 minutes after initially getting the tech, it's hard to really say you're ahead. Over the long run, you do eventually save a lot of wood through a better wood-to-food conversion ratio, and there's undeniably value to delaying that reseeding on all your farms, even by a few minutes each. But there's always been this unusually long delay before the farm techs feel like they do anything, until now. Admittedly, Heavy Plow was kind of an exception because it gives farmers +1 carry capacity, so there was a more immediate benefit in that case. But the point is that the new change giving existing farms more food is a big deal, as it means finally that delay between researching the tech and feeling a benefit is quite a bit shorter. Though how much shorter? The devil is in the details. There's a few ways they could have implemented this, and we'll take Horse Collar as the example, changing your farms from holding 175 to 250 food. The most generous way to have the tech affect existing farms would be to simply add 75 food to all of them, regardless of how much food they have left, though the devs didn't do it that way. Instead, they explicitly say it's proportional to how much food is left. And if we graph the amount of food we've taken from the farm on the x-axis and the food that Horse Collar adds to the farm on y, clearly if it's a brand new farm we haven't touched yet, it'll get the full plus 75. Whereas if we've collected 175 food from the farm to the point it's basically exhausted, the tech will add nothing. Intuitively, the wording of proportional implies that it's then just a straight line, where if we've half collected from a farm, we get half the benefit of Horse Collar, or plus 37 or 38 food. The blue line is not what you get when you actually test it out though, and instead they square the remaining amount of food, so the relationship looks like this red line. It seems counterintuitive, and given this is an equation for farming, using the root might have been more appropriate, but I carefully double-checked the numbers and this is what I got, with a half-use farm only giving a quarter of the boost, and by a third of a farm left, you only get about 10% of its effect, or plus 7 or 8 food in this case. Technically, this is still proportional, but is a conscious choice made by the devs that tells us something interesting about what they may be intending with this change. The idea seems to be, first off, they want to remove the punishment of constructing a farm immediately before a technology is researched. Heavy Plow, for instance, takes 40 seconds to research, and a farm takes just 15 seconds to make. So you'd have this awkward in-between time, and also led to differing opinions about whether it was worth delaying any farm placement in feudal age until after Horse Collar or not. At this point though, you might as well get farm upgrades whenever you can, as that exact timing dance of the different upgrades is gone, and every civilization except Frank's benefits from that aspect. There's now just a constant incentive to get them when you're able to, as even if you have say 10 farms averaging around 70% of their food left, delaying Horse Collar by a minute translates to about 100 less food being added by Horse Collar collectively. On the other hand, the way they've gone shows they're not really pushing to equalize the payoff time of farm and wood upgrades, as farms later in their cycle receive pretty paltry returns. If you have just 10% of a farm left, you get less than 1 extra food from Horse Collar. So for those farms you think you're getting a benefit in 1, 2, or 3 minutes, it's not very much benefit, and the wood upgrades are still generally going to pay off faster, with one exception we'll talk about in a minute. Even Sicilians, who theoretically benefit the most from this change, if you have 10% of a farm left, you get just plus 5 food from crop rotation, or about 15 more seconds before the next reseeding. The most interesting case remains Heavy Plow, with that +1 carry capacity, plus the fact a lot of farms at that point all have their current life extended. At a time, you're usually under a crunch for wood, for extra town centers, siege workshops, a university, etc. And you might see players start to shift to even prioritize that over bowsaw, or at least there's less of an obvious gap between them value-wise. I'd understand an argument this all takes away a bit of strategy around the timing of those upgrades now. At the same time, the game doesn't usually make the timing of upgrades punishing like this, and fletching, for example, doesn't exclude existing units. So farm upgrades were a bit of a weird outlier to have this sort of logic, probably because it was initially easier to code it that way. The big takeaway is a change incentivizes grabbing farm upgrades whenever you can sneak them in, but keep in mind farms with under 70% of their starting food are getting less than half the benefit of those techs, and often a lot less than that, so it's probably not going to be as crazy or impactful as it sounds at first. Next though, while we're on the topic of farming, let us move on and clarify a bit of confusion surrounding a change to poles and their farming. The last patch had a change for them that said newly built folwarks collect 10% of current food from existing farms instead of only newly built ones. Just a reminder, new farms built within a folwarks range instantly drop off 10% of their food, so a 250 food farm drops off 25 food instantly. At first, the wording of this change does seem reasonable, as maybe you have a farm around your town center and add a folwark to the outside, and it'll collect some food that wasn't grabbed initially. But any amount of thought into this, and you'll realize this is very easily exploited. Imagine building 8 farms in the late game and then repeatedly building and deleting a folwark between them to spend 1,280 wood to gather 4,400 food. If you calculate the implied rate of gathering here, your single villager building those farms and then folwark over and over to burn through them after crop rotation would be gathering at about the speed of 21 farmers on his own just by repeating that process, albeit it's a bit tedious and wasteful of wood. Testing it out though, building a folwark beside existing farms, it turns out actually does nothing. The patch notes have since been updated though to clarify that that is not in fact the change they made, and instead what they meant to say was that when you get farming upgrades, the folwark automatically collects 10% of the new food added onto the farm. For example, here we have a farm beside an existing folwark. Say I built before horse collar, so I instantly received 17.5 food when it was done. Now if I get horse collar after the fact, in this example it's at 83% of its starting amount, so after squaring that, the farm receives plus 51 food. The new change is simply that the folwark will then instantly grab 10% of that, so I get plus 5 food in the bank. The practical application of this is that there's now even more incentive for poles to get their farm upgrades and not put those off, as not only do you get some wood value out of extending those farms like everyone else as usual, but also an instant dividend of food, which if you have a lot of farms could add up to a considerable amount. The example I gave was 5 food from just one farm with horse collar, whereas crop rotation with 40 plus farmers could be essentially free by instantly refunding more resources than it costs, or at least refunding a good chunk. The point is, get your farm upgrades when you can, and that's doubly true for poles. And finally, the third topic we'll touch on is another new patch change, reducing pasture work rate by 4%. Just to briefly recap the journey of that building, if we compare it to farming rates of either inner ideal farms immediately touching a drop-off point, or second layer doubled up farms, which inherently have a lot more walking time and slower collection rate, initially pastures were 14 to 37% more efficient at release with no upgrades. The ranges of green numbers shown are just reflecting they were 14% better than perfectly placed farms and a whopping 37% better than those second layer farms, as pastures are their own drop-off points. So there's no such thing as a poorly placed pasture from an efficiency point of view. Last June they nerfed them, with the stated goal of making pastures just 7% better than perfect farms, and you can see my updated numbers from testing there. After the latest patch, I simply redid the exact same test, still accounting for reseed time and farm distance, and you can see pastures have dropped, though are still consistently better than perfect farms, especially in the early game. Pastures remain incredibly good, and I guess the positive is at least the gather rate is going down slowly over time, and not up. So that's a look at the 3 big pieces of news in the AoE2 farming world. When you go digging into farming mechanics, you never know what's going to turn up, and obviously the biggest change is the buff to the farm upgrades, though I think it was worth clarifying the poles change and the updated pastures. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.